Well, I didn't know if you were going to be with the basics tonight.
Oh yeah. No, first Thursday of the month, always camera basics. Hello everybody, welcome to another camera class. My name is Saxon. We're about to get started here on, pull this up, camera basics. Alright, let me go shut the door real quick and then we'll get started in a minute here. Can I get you a water bottle?
Please.
You can take that one. Haven't even opened it yet. Make sure this all looks good. Perfect, and my volume is going on my microphone. Awesome. All right, so let's get started. So camera basics. I mean, really the start of this is that we're graduating from our smartphone. We don't want to use that to take photos. We want to get something a little bit more professional, or we want to kind of just start to gradually get into the world of either a DSLR or a mirrorless camera. And so this is your basic 101 to get started with everything. So where to go when all else fails. So I like this slide a lot because, again, I'm a good resource. I can always answer questions, help out as much as I can. But I will say reading the owner's manual is a good practice before doing anything. Most of these cameras have a really thick book to be prepared for, but at the end of the day, they've got a lot of good imaging or a lot of good resources in there. One of my personal favorites, a customer told me about a while, is this imaging resource. They're great. They've got reviews on cameras. They'll do camera comparisons, but they also have a podcast. So if you're someone who gets very nerdy about your cameras and you like to geek out on the numbers and specs, Imaging Resource is a really good tool. Canon, Nikon, and Sony, all of their websites have very thorough explanations and tutorials on their cameras, as well as things like shutter speed, aperture, understanding light metering, video. So it's really important to check out their websites, especially if you own one of their cameras. And then my personal favorite is still YouTube. The joke I always make was when I was like 10 or 12 years old, I had to fix a toilet in my house. Nobody else could do it. I did it. I watched a bunch of videos on YouTube. I figured out how to do it. YouTube is one of the best resources out there. If you look your camera model up specifically on YouTube, you'll find 100+ videos speaking just about your camera, things you didn't know, tips and tricks, all sorts of cool stuff. So first thing we'll talk about are memory cards. Now, anybody who's watched this class before, we do this every time. Where do you go when or what to do when you're taking pictures, and make sure you have two. Anytime we're taking a photo, they're going to get saved to an SD card. Now our camera is going to have different types of SD cards. They can have a regular shaped SD card, which is what you see. They can have a mini SD card or a micro SD. They could also have a CF Express or a compact flash if you've got an older or more advanced model of camera. Any of those are fine. Just get the one that works specifically for yours. And the reason we say have two on there is because there's copper contact strips in the back of that SD card. And over time, weather, erosion, natural just wear and tear, those copper strips can get very damaged or can get kind of dirty after a while, and they won't be read by the camera. So it's important that we have multiple SD cards when we go do a shoot or when we're just vacationing, just in case one fails, you have a backup. Now your picture should never live on your memory card. It's important to remember that. The memory card is really there to be a vehicle to get the photos from the camera to the computer, or to get the photos off the camera and to whatever source you want to leave them to. It's not meant to be a permanent solution, and the only reason being is that the SD card is very flimsy, and it has a much higher chance of breaking or getting ruined, and if that happens, we need to make sure that we have proper backup for that. To ensure that you're transferring your photos properly to your computer, these are my steps that I recommend. First things first, turn off your camera and wait at least 5 seconds. If you do this and hold your camera up to your ear, you're going to hear the noise that it makes as it powers down. So it's important that we're doing that to make sure that everything's turned off, done, and good to move on to the next part, which would be then removing the card and placing that in the card reader. try to avoid using your camera to transfer photos to your device. The reason I say that is because having less things connected leads to less chance for error. Again, really there is no problem with connecting your camera to your computer, but one of the things I always think about is if you're drinking something or you have a dog or you just have kids, if that camera gets snagged and pulled out of the computer, not only can it damage your computer, you could break the camera completely, and all those photos that you were in the middle of transferring could now be lost forever. So it's important that we try to avoid using the camera to transfer photos, and we try to use the SD card and remove that from the camera and use a card reader properly. Ideas for card readers. Again, you can find any of these guys out there. There's really cheap ones, there's very expensive ones. Get one that works for you, that you find is reliable. That's my biggest recommendation on there. You can get very fancy with them and get the highest end reader, but at the end of the day, whatever works best for you is just fine. I like the one on the left personally, just because not only can it fit all of the SD cards in there, but it also has a little charging hub on there, so when it's plugged into the computer, it can also charge maybe your camera or your microphone or any of your other accessories that you have while you're transferring all the data. So that's a nice feature. So the next step on this is to not lose your photos or damage your card. We're going to copy photos to a destination folder. The reason that we're not moving them or copying them is because we want to make sure we make a duplicate of the photos that we already have in case something goes wrong in the middle of the transfer. If we're moving those images over, we run the risk of possibly losing all of the images if the transfer doesn't go properly. If we copy them though, we're duplicating the images. Therefore, if something does get messed up and happens while we're transferring, we have a copy, or we already have all the photos on the SD card ready to go to try again. And if we're using Windows, we're using Explorer to find those photos. If we're using Mac, we're using Finder. Next, we want to make sure that we copy, not move those photos to another place. Typically, I like things like an external drive, Amazon Prime Photos, or Google Drive. Everybody in the world and their mother has an Amazon Prime account for the most part. Almost everybody has a Gmail account of some kind. If you have those, then you're able to do their cloud-based solution without having to pay extra or do monthly fees, unless you need more storage. That's an important thing to remember. If you're running out of storage, all of those services offer where you can pay monthly for more or get anything else that you need. Welcome in. We just started a minute ago. We're just talking about SD cards transferring images, so you haven't missed much. So now that we've copied them to a second place, we basically only have a few more steps to go. And that's going to be first now ejecting the card before physically removing it. The reason we want to eject the card is to make sure that no other photos or information is transferring over. Again, we want to make sure that we limit the amount of, or we want to limit the chance of damaging or losing our photos. Therefore, we want to make sure that we eject the card before removing it, just so that way we know that the card is done, photos are transferred, and now the card has been safely ejected from the computer. We can then remove the card and then format the card in the camera. Formatting is going to erase all old info on the card. It's a really nice feature on there, and the format will also then make it so that way your camera and that SD card get the most optimized shooting experience. That could be an extra 3 or 4 photos on there. That could be an extra 20 minutes of video. There could be a lot of different things you get out of formatting a card. But if you format that card specifically for that camera, you're at least guaranteeing that the camera and the card you're using are basically kind of merged together. They're one. A question came up a while ago. Can you format cards on multiple cameras? Say I use one card, can I format it between different cameras? Yes, you can. You can always do that. Formatting the card doesn't damage it. It just deletes all the old information on there and then makes it so that way that camera is optimized for shooting the best with the formatting. You can still also delete them on the computer, and I like to add that on there because some people only shoot with one camera. They formatted it on there. You can select all the old photos that you've already transferred over and copied over, and you can delete all of those and put it back in. But my recommendation is to format. It takes the hassle off of your back of needing to delete everything on the card, and it also makes sure that that card is set for the camera you're shooting at. And anytime, people online, same thing for anybody in class today. If you have any questions, interrupt at any time, and I can answer them for you. Your backup plan, or the way that I look at this, is it starts with your SD card. All of the photos that you're taking are going to get taken on the SD card. From there, you're going to use that SD card to transfer them to your computer. And then from there, I always recommend having one more source as your backup. An external drive is nice because you have a tangible item that you can hold, carry, and move around with you. Cloud-based solution is great because you can then put it into the cloud and it will then show up no matter where you're at. If you're on safari in Africa and you're taking photos and you get back to your hotel and you check in on your laptop, you can save everything to the cloud, delete everything off of your camera, and then people at home or anybody or any time you want, you can then unlock your account and then be able to see all those photos on there. So the cloud-based solution is a really nice option too. I do recommend trying one if you've never tried it before. I personally use a hard drive because I like tangible items, but I like the cloud-based solution because, again, you can access it anywhere that you are in the world. Google Drive has the Drive, and that's a really good one. If you are using Microsoft Outlook for any reason, I know a lot of work business emails have that. In that case, you can use OneDrive, which is also a cloud-based solution and works really well. And then Adobe Creative Cloud, that's one of my personal favorites because you get to also have all of the Adobe Suite apps there. So things like Photoshop, InDesign, Lightroom, all of those things are at your fingertips, plus then a storage system for your photos. So if you're even remotely interested in editing your photos, that would be a great one to look at.
Excuse me, I was going to ask about, I don't know if it's related to this or not, but like I have a Samsung and I have Google, and then some people have like the iCloud, and to be able to, like for me to be able to share photos.
Yeah.
I mean, are you able to share, or does it have to be emailed? You know what I mean?
No, you can share
Like two different. Can you have an iCloud and a Google and
have them merge together, or like have them communicate
share?
to each other?
Yeah, share.
Not necessarily. With the cloud-based solution, it's really just meant to store everything. From there, you have to either email it, text it, Dropbox it. There has to be another way for you to then send it away.
That's what it seemed like.
Yeah, with the Drive, there really is no other way to do it. Even if, let's say, you're on Google Drive, for example. For work today, I had to take photos of something and then send them out. I don't have the ability to just send via the Drive. I have to email them from the Drive. Same thing would happen with the iCloud, either texting or emailing, and everything else would basically be the same. So there's no way for you to directly send from the cloud to another cloud or to another person.
Thank you.
So the next big part of this class is really going through a tour of your camera. I'm going to show a DSLR body, and we're going to talk about the different buttons and functions. The nice part is that most of this stuff is already either on your camera, or it might just be in the menu system of the camera. So if at any point while you're looking at your camera you got a question on those buttons, just ask. But I just mentioned DSLR, and what is that? What does that mean? There's two different main types of cameras when we talk about interchangeable lens cameras. When we're graduating from our smartphone, we're typically graduating into one of these two items, or we're doing a point and shoot camera, which I don't really talk about here, but it functions the same. The difference between a DSLR and a mirrorless camera comes down to a mirror. On the camera itself, there is, on the DSLR, there's a mirror. Just like the old school cameras with 35mm or wide format, light in your image comes through, it bounces off the mirror and enters a pentaprism. That pentaprism then pushes it out through an optical viewfinder, meaning if your camera's not turned on and you just look through the eyepiece, you'll see whatever the lens sees on there, because naturally it can do that for us because of the mirrors and the system is there. With mirrorless, the newest technology that they have for cameras, there no longer isn't a need for a mirror. There's a digital sensor with a shutter right in front of it that's able to then take the image in, and then it's able to process it within a millisecond, even less than that, through the electronic viewfinder. So there really is little to no delay on a mirrorless camera as opposed to a DSLR. Back maybe 10, 15 years ago when the mirrorless was still on the rise, yes, DSLR was much more dominant, had a much faster rate to it, But at this point, mirrorless has really been the king, I would say, of cameras at the current moment. Also looking at them too, you have a smaller profile body and a little bit of a bigger one when it comes to the DSLRs. Typically that also goes for the front of the camera too. The DSLR is going to be a little bit more chunky, whereas the mirrorless camera is going to be a little bit more slim and not as thick. The nice part with that is if you're someone who has either shaky hands or maybe bigger cameras or bigger lenses are too much for you, the mirrorless is a really great option because then you can kind of get something that's lighter weight. So, when we look at the top of our camera, this should be the layout. Now again, everyone's camera is going to look a little bit differently, and some of these buttons might be located in different places. But the main I would say, course is all there of what to expect when you're looking at your camera. The first button I'll talk about is the video start and stop. On the camera somewhere you should have a red dot. When you have the camera turned on, if you press that button, it should automatically start taking a video for you, or it automatically puts you in the video setting. Power switch, typically it's going to be located somewhere on the right handle of the camera. The reason being is when we hold the camera, we hold with our right hand and our left hand underneath, and we'll talk about hand placement a little bit later. But from there, it gives you the ability to use your index finger or your thumb to turn on and off the camera. Now again, that can be located in other spots, but typically it's in the front, and usually it's around the shutter release button. So if you're brand new to cameras, when you take a picture, you press down on the shutter release, that opens the shutters and then closes them, giving us our image and then allowing us to see it on the LCD screen. Exposure compensation. So depending on the setting that you're using, if you're using automatic, you probably won't have access to this. You'll have to either go to program auto or just stick with regular auto and not use the exposure compensation feature. The exposure compensation is basically the camera's ability to take the entirety of the exposure and either lighten or darken it. If we think about film, when we're taking a picture on film, we're exposing the film to light, to everything that's in front of it, and it burns the image into the film, and that's where we then get to see our image. In that same boat, exposure compensation changes what the exposure of the camera would be. So if we had a dark image and we wanted to make it a little bit lighter, we could raise our exposure and make things a little bit brighter on the image. It will start to wash things out and make things appear very white or starky, but it gives us the ability to not edit or go back and fix things later on. On the flip side though, if an image is so bright and light because you've got direct sunlight shining in your face, then you can lower the exposure compensation, making the overall image a little bit darker. It's not the same as ISO. ISO is again a very different set where it really just takes the camera's sensitivity and makes it darker or brighter or less bright. Whereas exposure compensation reads the ISO and the two go hand in hand, and then it basically creates either a darker or a lighter image depending on which way that you go. The mode dial, which typically will be on the right hand side, and it's going to have all of these different shapes, symbols, and letters on there. I consider that to be your gear shifter on your car. If you want to go reverse, or you want to go into second gear or first gear, or you just want to go into neutral, that is the same thing as using the mode dial. For most people, and I think I say it on another slide towards the end, I recommend all beginners stick on automatic. As great as it is to try out every little feature on the camera, the new cameras, the new mirrorless technology, those cameras are very smart. So you really can allow them for your beginning stages to do the work for you, and you can then eventually learn exactly what the camera's doing for you to get that maybe a better feel. The live view switch, now typically it's a switch on the older cameras. A lot of the cameras nowadays, it's just a button on the side there, and some cameras it might just now be called display. So that's another feature that you might see on there. If you have a display button, viewfinder is very similar. When our live view is going to be the same, almost the same thing. The live view allows you to toggle the screen on your camera. If you want the camera turned on, or you want the screen on, or you want the screen off. Obviously, if you keep the screen off, your only way of shooting is going to be through the viewfinder. And in that case as well, you're not really going to be able to see anything on the LCD screen. It'll black everything out on there. On the flip side though, you can turn the live view on. It will use a little bit more of your battery life, but now you can look through the screen and the viewfinder both at the same time, if you choose. The command dial, which is right underneath that, the command dial is going to be your ability to switch and toggle your either aperture priority or shutter priority, depending on what you're doing. If you're shooting full manual, you'll have control over that as well too. But there's typically a command dial on the back end, and there's usually one here on the front. Again, when we think about our hand placement, they make it that way so it's ergonomic and we're able to change things on the fly. If you're using settings like automatic, command dial or the front dial up there really won't have anything to do with what you're shooting on, because the camera's going to do all of that work for you. There's the slide. Start with auto. Again, it's great to get excited about your camera and to test everything out, but in the case of you trying to go out and maybe take photos of, you know, your nieces or daughters or kid's birthday party, and you just got this camera because you're going to make an investment and take all these photos, start with auto, because if you don't get those pictures, you'll probably be really disappointed in yourself rather than being excited that you got to, you know, try out all these different features or settings. Now when we look at the mode dial on there, and it's important to kind of go through this, everyone's going to be a little different. All brands do it differently. For example, you have a Sony camera down here. You can see how they label everything out. You have your Nikon over here. You can see how they do it a little bit differently. And then you have an old school Canon, which has a bunch of different features and faces and shapes on there. But the idea is that they give you a setting for almost everything that you could want to do with this camera. For example, the auto or A+, that's auto control over all settings and functions. I personally always recommend using this because, again, when you're starting, it's nice to play and to try everything out, but it's another thing when we're trying to get precious photos and we want to make sure that we get it right. Automatic shouldn't be the thing that you use forever, but it should be the way that you start using the camera. M is for full manual control over the camera's array of functions. This gives you things like an ISO, shutter speed, aperture priority, metering, bracketing, focusability, manual focus as well too. All of that can be done through manual. So again, the more advanced you get, it's not a bad idea. A or AV is your aperture priority control. Aperture priority is the camera's ability for background to foreground relationship and also blurring out your background. Camera intermediate, we'll talk more about the aperture priority and shutter priority. The main thing I want everyone to take away with them, especially for beginners, is just to play with automatic for right now. I think it's an important thing for your confidence, but also for you to kind of get a feel for what the camera can and can't do. Shutter priority, S or TV, is the control over just the shutters function. So how fast that's opening and closing, burning our image into our screen, giving us that playback. Program stands for program auto, and its aperture and shutter are at auto, but everything else is changeable. So this is great for someone who is past automatic and now they want to try maybe changing things like their lighting, or maybe they want to change things like their metering. It could be ISO, it could also be, I'm trying to think of some other good ones here, the bracketing size for your focusing area. All of that gets controlled through the program setting on there. And again, you don't have to change anything. You can always leave it on auto, but it gives you that ability. So if you are comfortable with auto and you're ready to move on, program's a good one to use. Last but not least, bulb or B. The camera is fully customizable, but as long as you're holding that shutter release, the camera will stay open. This is great for long exposure shots, which we'll talk more about in the intermediate class. But for those who really want very detailed or saturated images and who use tripods for the most part, then you can absolutely try using the B setting on your camera. Scenes. Now, everybody in the room has a mirrorless camera. For the most part, you're not going to see scenes on the mirrorless, but they were automatic modes from the camera company that allowed you to basically take a good photo without necessarily having to go manual or AV or TV. And what that basically meant was that all the different shapes represented something different. The gentleman or the little silhouette with a star behind it was the nighttime photography. The running person was for sports. The flower was for macro, close-up photography. The sky or the mountains with the cloud going through, that would have been for scenery or nature. And then obviously you have your head, which would have been for portraits. So again, there are different settings on there with the scenes. Most people don't have that anymore. You just have automatic or A+, and that's going to be more than enough. Moving to the side of the camera, we have our flash button. Some cameras won't have flashes. A lot of mirrorless cameras don't, because the mirrorless series already has such a good ISO and has such a good low light performance that it doesn't necessarily need a flash. The function button is going to be the button that you can set to really be whatever you want it to be. So if you have an FN button, there's two options for this button. It can either be a way for you to get to the menu system, or it can be a fully customizable and controllable button that you can set and do whatever you like with. And they give you a list of what you can and can't set that to. The zoom ring is pretty self-explanatory. If you have a lens that is a telephoto lens, you're able to use the zoom ring to change that telephoto quality. Focus ring on there is going to act similar. If you're using the manual controls on your lens, as you use the focus ring, it's going to either help you focus or unfocus on the target that you're trying to capture an image of. But again, it only goes if you're using manual focus. Lens retract button, we don't see this on many cameras anymore, but older cameras that didn't have computers or AIs within the lens, they were susceptible to rattling around while traveling. So therefore they put this focus button on there, which really helps make sure that, the lens retract button, which helps keep the lens retracted in on itself. So that way, let's say you throw it in a bag or you're moving around, it won't open up and then possibly allow for damage or breakage or any other kind of bad thing that could happen to your lens. The lens release button is your camera's ability to eject the lens. So typically if you're holding down the release button, you're going to turn counterclockwise with the lens, that'll remove it. If you're putting a lens on, you'll match it up dot to dot, turn it clockwise, and you'll hear a click once it gets all the way through. And the last thing is our drive mode button. Drive mode is typically located on the bottom of the camera, usually in the front. Sometimes it's located on the sides, and every once in a while it's on the top. But really what this button does is it allows you to switch between burst photography, single photography, or timed photography. So if you're someone who wants to take a group photo with a family, you don't have any other means of taking that photo, you can set the camera up on a tripod or a table, hit the timer, run in front of it, get your picture taken. If you're at a sports game and you're watching some football, you might want to use then the drive mode button to make sure that you have a burst of shots. That ensures that if you're shooting, you're going to get one of those. So if you've got something that's moving, one still picture might turn out blurry or not look right. But if we switch to these multiple stacked kind of squares on top of each other, that's going to be our burst photography. And usually, as long as you're holding that finger down, it's going to take as many as the camera allows. Some cameras only do 8, 14, 15. Some cameras do 30, 40 photos in a burst.
Not 100% sure. And I have an FN1 and 2.
Yeah, so you have a multifunction button. So you can set either of those two to be what you want them to be. As far as that other button,
I think so.
it looks like you're probably going to have it in the menu system.
I do the auto, but I can't find the button. And what's hard is when you're using the camera, you just want to use it, and to go into the menu, you're like, what? I'll never get back to where I was.
Yeah, how do you get back to just taking the picture?
What I found, I was at a wedding and I had auto, but everything on the dance floor was blurry. And so I'm trying for that not to happen, you know. So I thought like P was portrait, you know.
Well, there's a few things on this one that I don't understand either, that I was,
So one of the tricks, if you hit the menu button to get back, just do a half squeeze on your trigger. That'll always send you back.
Which-
So
Yeah, when you say the trigger, you mean the,
Your button to take the photo.
okay,
So, for example, if I click on the I button here, now I want to get out of the screen, I just do a little half click there, and then now I'm out. And then I can always go back. In your case, if we press that I button again, it's going to be right there, it's the release mode. We're then going to see all of these there. So there's your 10-second timer, and then these are all of your other continuous pictures. You can choose any of these that you want, and then it'll take X amount of photos.
Oh Lord.
I'll put you back on single, so that's there, and you can always
Well, there
choose.
was the thing is even at this wedding, like I like to take a couple because somebody's eyes closed or whatever, and it seemed like there was such a long period that I had to wait, and they're already, they're, leaving the scene of the
Yep.
crime, so.
The burst photos are perfect for that. And that's where then you get more of a chance to get something, especially if they're moving or they're doing stuff and you're worried about that. We get a lot of people that do for their kids for sports. And the kids will be playing soccer or baseball or tennis or whatever it is, and they're constantly moving. And that's always what I recommend. Put on the burst photos. You can do the high burst, so that way you get a lot of photos taken at once. But it should take about, depending on the camera, anywhere I'd say between 5 to 10 photos a second.
Okay.
So
And that would be the same thing I would do for the dance floor or something?
that's it.
can you use it while you're doing a video?
No. So when you're shooting video, this is the part that I get asked about all the time. Most cameras don't allow for you to take a picture while you're shooting the video. What they then do is they'll take that video and put it on the computer, and they'll take, one still from it.
That's what I-
There's only one
Yeah.
brand of camera that does it, and that's Panasonic. Camcorders allow for it too, so if you've got a camcorder, most of them will have a button on there so you can press it. It'll take an image while it's shooting the video, but for the most part, and I can't give you a real reason why, you're not going to see any of the Sonys, Nikons, Canons do that feature where you're shooting a video and you can take an image at the same time.
So like that drive mode button, that would be this one here on the,
Yes.
down here, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So the one side is the drive mode and the other side is the timer. You can use the timer or you can use the drive mode, but basically it just controls how your camera is about to, let's say, capture its image or what it's.
And you have to hold that.
No, you just press it one time, it goes 10 seconds,
So
and then
you set it in your,
for the burst photography, you'll just hold.
okay.
But if you're doing the timer, you'll just set it, hit the one time, and then run in front of the camera to get your photo. But if you're doing burst, set it to burst, hold your finger down, and you'll
So
hear
like
the
when
noise.
we were whale watching,
Mhm.
we'd be looking and you'd see something and then all of a sudden it would go away. But if we hit that burst,
Mhm.
it would take multiple
Exactly.
shots so that we could get it at different intervals.
Exactly.
Okay.
And hopefully out of that bunch you get one that's perfect. That's the main goal of doing
Okay.
it. Some people, they've been doing it for so long. I think of the old skateboarding magazines from the 90s where you'd have Tony Hawk going on like a
Yeah.
half pipe, and they would have it where it was just like 5 of him stacked on top of it. That's because the photographer did the burst mode on there, and then they went in later and edited it so that way it had him like jumping across. That's a whole different thing. But if you're doing it, that's the best way to do it.
Okay. And then what is it called in the menu to get that burst? Cause I just put menu and then I'm not sure where to go from
You
there.
don't have to press the menu button on this one. You have to squeeze to get out. It's the I button.
Okay.
Your I button is going to be your shortcut button. So sometimes FN is your shortcut button, sometimes the I is your shortcut button, but it's basically the button on the camera that allows you to get to usually your most used settings. That could be your focus area, that could be your metering, that could be your bracketing, that could be your burst shooting on there as well too. There's a few different things that it
So
can
the
do.
I button would be the info button on this camera.
On this camera, no. On this model, you don't have it. Actually, you do. You have Q.
Where do you see the Q at?
Right in the center there. So if I move my hand,
Okay.
let me half squeeze
Okay,
the trigger,
yeah.
hit the Q button, and that's where you have a bunch of different color tones and all these other presets on there. Canon does it a little differently, where then you can click on any of these buttons here and then change their settings too. You can also just press the menu button, and that'll give you some quick changes right here.
Okay.
But your main button is going to be, get out of there, the Q button.
Okay, so that's in the middle of the dial.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And right now we're in automatic, so you're limited on what you can and can't do on there. Once you get out of automatic and kind of move forward a little bit more, like program auto, then you get more things that you can change and play with. But auto, they try to make it very basic so that way not to confuse you and have you.
That's what I left it on, I just
Yeah.
left it on auto the whole time I was
Yeah.
out, cause
That's what I did too.
my fat fingers just.
It's a good way to get started.
Because I kept hitting these buttons up here too,
Yeah.
while I was trying to hold it, it just,
Years ago, when these were still new and they were still not good on the technology, it made a lot more sense when you had a mirrorless or a DSLR or a film camera to set everything on there, because you wanted to be more particular, and the camera didn't necessarily have the best auto features. They've really made cameras more user friendly to the person who's just beginning, and their automatic is really great on both these cameras that you guys have here. Mirrorless technology plus that automatic. The camera's very smart and it does a lot of work for you. For the most part, it should give you the end result you're looking for.
But will it also, I found that it didn't automatically do the flash, and then
It
I
doesn't.
was, it doesn't.
It does, but
Okay.
that's only, it doesn't, and the only reason it doesn't do that is because technically with the ISO that you have on your cameras, it performs a lot better in low light, to the point where then only if you need the flash will it really pop up. You might also have a setting on there too that prevents it from popping up unless you turn it on. And the way that you do on this guy, once the camera's
It's
on,
not on.
exactly, and then you just hit that button there, and then it pops up.
Right.
Most mirrorless cameras, they don't come with a flash. So some of the, I'd say entry-level ones have them, or some of the more portable ones have them, because then they don't really expect you to carry a big flash with you. So on both of your models, you have a pop-up flash. The only time you'll see it pop up is if it's very dark, but if it can read enough light, the camera usually won't pick it up. That's when then you've got to put it up yourself.
you know, I had a problem with that, remember? I couldn't take a picture
Okay.
with the flash up.
We could play with it at the end and see what's going on.
I mean, I'm just, if I remember correctly, there was something where it got locked and I ended up using my phone to take the picture I wanted.
Let's see. We can take a look.
That was the one with the boat. And you see the other boat passing by us.
That was the drive mode button. We'll go to the next slide. So the back of your camera. So menu button, we were just talking about that. Menu gets you to more of the menu settings on your camera, more of the hard changes that you can make, more permanent changes. Really, it's made to go into the more deep dive of the camera. Do you like the text, the language? Do you want to change your function buttons and make those something else? Do you want to set up the wireless transfer between your phone and your camera? That's the kind of stuff that you can expect to see on the menu button. When we move over, then we have what's called the diopter adjustment. If you've ever owned a pair of binoculars, there's typically a little bit of a dial on the center that works for people with glasses, which we're all wearing glasses, so this makes it easy to talk about. But it's like when you go to the eye doctor and they sit there and they go, okay, 1 or 2. 1 or 2. That's the same thing the diopter is. I will say, whatever you set the diopter to, remember if it is with your glasses on or without the glasses. Because the big thing to remember is that you're positioning this diopter to work with whatever eye you're using. So like for example, I wear contacts sometimes. When I wear contacts, it has the same strength as my glasses. If I'm wearing glasses and I go to shoot, I have to keep these on and put the piece up to my eye, to my glass. If I move these off and I put the piece up, it's going to look blurry to me because I don't have any prescriptions on, and my camera is adjusted towards my eye when I have my prescriptions on, if that makes sense. So when you're setting the diopter, remember what you're doing. Luckily, they make the diopter very easy for you to get to on your camera. It should be on the side of your view piece. You can just adjust it at any time that you need. So once you adjust it once, it's not like you can't go back and change it again. You can always readjust on there. So you should see
It's just
that.
for us to see, it's not changing the quality of the
No,
picture at all.
not changing the
Okay.
quality of the image at all. But it is up to you so that you can see what you're taking a picture of.
That's ours up here, right? The button that will,
No. So yours is going to be
oh, that's right.
Oh,
right on the bottom. And you can see it as it goes. So yours is a little slide piece that goes.
Yeah.
Yours, I believe, is
It's
on
right
the side.
here. Yeah, it's
Exactly.
like that.
Usually it's always going to be next to the viewfinder. That other dial that you were just pointing at there, that's that command dial I was talking about. So on the first slide, this dial right here, the command dial, that's what that dial is there for you. What that means is if you're using any of like the aperture or shutter priority modes, that command dial is going to let you change that. So if you want to make a faster shutter speed or a slower shutter speed, or if you want to change the depth of field with your aperture, if you're on one of those settings, that's the dial that does it for you.
Alright, but if I'm not on it, if I'm on auto, I don't even have to worry about
No,
that.
if you play with that dial, it really should do nothing.
Okay. Thank you.
Of course.
It's like, why do we even buy the camera?
Huh?
No, I see, and I get that all the time too, because people are like, if I'm doing automatic, am I really using the camera fully? Yes, you are still using the camera fully, because the whole point of you getting away from, or getting one of these is to get a better photo than your phone can take. And we're at this really crazy time where phones are so powerful with their camera, but they're still limited. There's still things that the image quality might not look right, or it just doesn't, it feels fuzzy, or people look distorted. During my last family gathering, or last Christmas, we took a big group photo, and I swear I thought my grandmother was going to lose her mind. She kept looking at the photo, and she's like, I don't look like this. This looks wrong. She's like, everybody looks like they have 10 extra pounds on them, and I'm like, all right, Graham, relax. She goes, no, you can't tell me any different. Cameras versus phones, cameras always. I'm like, I get it. Trust me, I work with cameras all day. Again, we push to get past our cell phone with these, so we get a more fancy photo, we get an upgraded photo. We also get that nice tactile feel of holding the camera in our hands, which is, to me, a classic experience. So the diameter adjustment, that's what our eyepiece, that's us adjusting it towards our eye. Next to that, we should have somewhere on the back of the camera an info button. Now, info on some cameras will be there. Canon is a really big proponent of using it, and DSLRs are a big proponent of it. And I like the info button specifically because if you're shooting in automatic and you're getting more comfortable with auto, what you can do is you can go play back through your images, hit the info button, and it'll tell you exactly what the photo did. So it'll tell you that, okay, they used this aperture with this shutter speed and this ISO. And if you get that, oh wow, this is my best photo I took of the grandkids or of the glaciers, and you're like, everything looked perfect, what did my camera decide to do for me? You can press the info button on that image, and it should break down all of those things for you, which then should help educate you to get away from auto. That should be your kind of way of learning, okay, if my camera's saying to do this aperture with this shutter speed, and I had a lot of sunlight coming down, and that's probably what I should try to do when I'm walking around the park or when I'm, at the picnic next summer. That sort of thing.
And that is different than the I button, correct?
Yes, that is different than the I button. The I button, and we'll jump down to that guy, the I button is going to be your menu button for the most part. It's a shortcut menu on there. Some people might have Q, some people have I, and some people have an FN button that does it too, depending on your
Or some have a menu button.
Exactly, well, you have a menu button. But you have the Q button on there too. And the Q is the same thing as the I. It's just a little bit different on how they word it and how they show it
Oh,
on
I
the
got
physical
you. Yeah,
camera.
the cues with the set button.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So again, everybody's camera is a little different, but that I, Q, or FN button, like for example, I shoot on Sony and Fujifilm. Fuji is a QN button, is what they call it, and then on my Sony, it is an I button. So again, everyone's a little different with how they do their cameras. Image playback, or let's go back up, focus and exposure lock. So people ask, why would I want to use a focus or exposure lock? The focus is a really nice feature because some people hate doing a half click on the top of their camera. Some people, they'll fat thumb it and they'll just accidentally take a photo instead. If you press that button while you're trying to focus, which is really where your thumb lines up, it will focus the shot for you, and then it only locks if you really hold it down. So again, if you're trying to take a photo, instead of doing a half click on the top trigger button to get the focus, you can just press that focus or exposure lock on there and it'll focus for you.
Is it the AF button?
Yep.
Okay.
And it's really nice, it's a cool feature to use. If you hold it down and you lock the exposure on there, the reason you'd want to do that is, let's say that, for example, you get a job taking the yearbook photos for a grammar school. You're going to most likely have the kids sit down in the same exact spot, and you're just going to keep moving kids along to get the shot. rather than sitting there and refocusing the camera every single time, you could lock it into place because you've already have the parameters set up where the person is going to sit, and they're not moving either further back or closer up. They're always going in the same place. Same thing, I had a woman a couple weeks ago for one of my classes. She was getting ready to do food photography for her friend's restaurant. They were getting ready to do a digital online menu, so they needed images of every plate. So what they did, what I told her to do, was to set your lights up and do everything, put your camera on a tripod, use the exposure lock, and then lock into place so that way you could just slide a plate out, put the next set there, slide that out, put the next set there. You don't have to refocus, you don't have to readjust, you can just keep clicking away and getting your photos. So it's a nice tool depending on, again, what you're taking pictures of. Now after you've taken pictures, now you want to look back at them, that's where the image playback button comes in. Usually it's a square with a triangle on the inside. That's your way of looking through your memory card and seeing what you took. From there you can use the multi-selector, which is usually a ring on the camera, and you can start funneling through those pictures to see which one you have. When you hit that image playback button and then you use the multi-selector, it doesn't matter if your multi-selector has other things on there. So like for example with your Canon, your multi-selector, your ring, has all these different buttons on there and everything
Yeah,
else.
but this one here is the one that does it.
Exactly, but once you hit the image playback, then you can use these buttons to skip through your photos and see what you took. So it basically gets rid of the flash or the ISO that you normally would have. If you're taking a photo, that's when then those come up and then you're good to use those. The OK button, that's your center button. That's just for you to either hit OK to move to the next menu or change a setting or to delete a photo. That's your enter button. From there you have a magnifier and a demagnifier. I like to use these when I am looking at the quality of my images. So if I take a bunch of photos and I'm like, these look nice, I'll hit image playback, and then I'll use the demagnifier or magnifier to zoom into my photo a little bit and see the edges. Does everything look crisp? Does their eye look appropriate? Is it a red eye on there? Because I know that's a big thing with the cameras that can sometimes still happen. You basically are looking through to make sure that the camera or the photo you took looks nice. And you can use the magnifier, demagnifier to do that. And if you don't like an image, you can always hit the delete button and delete it. From there, usually once you delete it, you press OK, and then it erases it. Now I will say, I don't like deleting images on the camera this way. It wastes a lot more battery than you think. Deleting, I think, 10 or 15 photos will take like 3% off your battery life of your camera. So my recommendation is just keep taking photos when you're shooting. Delete afterwards, either after you've transferred the images onto the computer, format it, and it's a lot easier to delete it on the computer than it is on the camera.
After you sober up and then.
Exactly. Then you check and you're like, all right, what did I actually get with this thing? I was on a trip. I went on vacation to London for 10 days, and while I was out there, I obviously brought my camera. The other day, I didn't even look to see how many photos I took, but the other day I turned it on, and I have 1,900 photos I have to go through over my 10 days. And I realized, like, for me, when I shoot, I'll shoot something 5 times to make sure I got it, but I get very repetitive with it, and I change settings, and I go through. I don't really know when I'm going to go through all 1,900 of those photos, but I have to go through them one of these days.
Do you find it more advantageous to edit them on the camera rather than the computer?
I go right to the computer. Yeah, I go right to the computer.
Oh, really?
The computer software is so much better for the photos. Again, the camera is limited on what it can and can't do, and the editing stuff that's on the camera might be nice. But overall, I think Adobe, even the ones that Mac makes, the free one that you can use, their free photo editor, I think they're phenomenal.
Thank you.
Now, I get this picture. This was actually one that a customer emailed me, and I love showing this to people. She was upset. She was like, my camera doesn't work. I think you sold me a bad one. And then she sent me this image, and I had to explain, it's not the bat, it's the baseball player. Sometimes we get over our heads a little bit, and we try to use other settings, or we try to get fancy with it. It's important to remember that a camera is still a camera. It's not a cell phone. It doesn't have the AI technology that a phone has. If you learn how to use the camera appropriately, you're going to get some of the best images possible. But if you just take it out of the box, start taking pictures of people randomly without checking your settings, or just maybe calming yourself down a little bit and sticking on auto, you're going to get images that look like this. Going back into that, your camera isn't a smartphone. There's a lot of features on the cell phone that the cameras don't have. But at the same time, if you flip-flop, there's a lot of features that a camera has that a phone doesn't have. It's that balance in between. Taking a photo on your phone is fine. Everyone does it. There's no issue with that, especially if you're talking to a camera person. You might get that one camera snob who's, very hoity-toity about it, and they think that the phone is just the worst thing ever. But in reality of it, the phone has made it so much easier for us to take photos, share photos, do stuff. It's like back in the day when I still had all the, the disposable cameras, and we go to the zoo. I just think about it now if I was a kid and getting to go, I'd be able to just snap on my phone unlimited until until my fingers hurt, versus having 35 images that you can take on a disposable camera and then move on. So keep that in mind when you're shooting and you're learning. A lot of the times the phone will adjust and do things for you automatically, and that's where the camera, it has those features in there. You just have to set them or manually control them yourself a little bit. Might sound silly, but I think this is a really important one for beginners, holding your camera. Anything when it comes to arts, stuff like drawing, painting, sculpting, photography, sewing, the chance for carpal tunnel, arthritis, and other bone-related problems are very prevalent, and that is because of the position that we put ourselves in. That's also because of the way our hands are set up on there. So if we can just avoid doing bad practices, we can possibly prolong getting any of those things, especially if we take photos or we're doing art more often. So holding the camera, first things first, the image on the left side there, that would be the wrong way of shooting. His elbows are out, the camera grip is not appropriate, and it's not necessarily going to maybe do damage to him, but I think about it this way: when you're chicken winging it, if someone bumps you and you've got the camera in your hand, you're more susceptible to dropping it, breaking it, getting a bad shot, and that could frustrate you, especially as a beginning photographer. I like to call it the porch support method, where if you ever look at like a balcony or a porch, you'll always see beams that are underneath it that kind of go at an angle to support that. And that's what we're doing with our arms. We're using our arms to hold our camera in position, and we're locking them into our rib cage or into our chest in order to make sure that the photo or that the camera is nice and even, and it also has the most stability, keeping us nice and non-wide too, so if people walk past us, there's less of a chance of getting bumped with it. But then also using the more support that we're getting from the bottom view versus having a wobbly chicken arms. Same thing on the right side. When we look at it, she's got the proper grip on the right, and on my right, your right as well too. I think everyone online should be the right side. When we look down in the bottom though, these are things to avoid. When we're shooting, we want to keep a straight back at all times. Now obviously we get angles where we have to point up or we have to squat low, and that's totally fine. Just remember to try to keep your back as straight as possible. That'll really help in the long run. It's like when you lift something, you always want to lift with your legs, not with your back. Same idea with this one. If we're bending, we want to bend with our knees, maybe position ourselves. We want to try not to arch our back or put ourselves in an uncomfortable position. Over time, that's where hunchbacks develop, that's where bad posture develops, that's where you can really run into some problems down the road if you're not being careful. This one I think is important. I like to always throw this in during the class. Focus, then shoot, and shoot through the entirety of the photo. I get a lot of people that will take a picture, and unless you're doing portrait work or you're taking a picture of one specific item, they will look at an image and they'll say, okay, the only thing I want to focus on is the laptop right in front of me here. I don't want to focus on any of the other things that are happening. But you forget that when we're looking at an image, we see everything around it. So if we're not focusing through the entirety of the image, then we're really doing ourselves an injustice, because that's when you're going to then go back and play through your images and be like, okay, I didn't see that in there. This is a bad picture. My example is I do this thing for our golf outing that one of our owners hosts every year, FAK, for autistic kids. And during the golf outing, one of the things I have to do is I take pictures of all of the vendors and our donators' signs. There's 200 signs in the entirety of this golf course, 18 holes. It takes hours for me to get through. It's a hot, I think, August day when we're doing this, so bugs are very prevalent. While I'm shooting, some of the photos, and I didn't notice it until the end, we have little flies that would be just stuck to the sign. It doesn't look bad. No one's upset about it, but it makes me upset because I don't like seeing that in there. It's not a perfect photo. So it's those little details that if you focus on the entirety of the image or entirety of the image, you should see that kind of stuff. If you don't and you just shoot, that's where then you go back through and you're like, well, this was a cool photo, but all 5 of these look terrible because I didn't notice there was, something going on in the background of what I was trying to shoot or something else. So focus, shoot through the whole picture. If you are moving, you're gonna get blurry photos. Again, if you have bad shake or you're not stable with your camera, get a tripod, get a monopod, get something that gives you more stability, because in the long run of it, it'll make or break your images. This is obviously a very exaggerated comparison because most people, if you got something like this kind of looks really cool. But if you get the really awkward blurs and it doesn't look right, if you're moving, doesn't matter how good of a camera you have, you're gonna get blurry photos. And it might be just the smallest amount of blur, but it'll show up. I have one of the best Sonys that they make right now, the A7R Mark V, and the camera is so fast. I can even turn it where the shutter doesn't even make noise, and you had no clue I'm taking pictures. But even then, no matter how fast I am, if I'm walking and doing something and I'm just kind of maybe taking a tiptoe, I was at the Westminster Abbey and I'm taking pictures of the church and people were walking around, so I kind of had to move a little bit. Some images came out great, others came out blurry, and it could just be a tiny bit of blur that I see on that image that then makes me, the photographer, upset. So I've got now, for the last little bit of class, the basics of taking great photos. So in my opinion, these are things that you should consider when taking photos. I always tell people the rules, but then I also tell them that rules are always meant to be broken, so don't follow these to a T, but if you can understand these, you can most likely get a better composition out of what you're trying to shoot. So the first thing I always talk about is filling the frame. The reason we want to fill the frame, and I'm going to throw some terms out there too, some art terms, is because we want to get rid of things called negative space, or dead space. When we look around her, all of this wall behind her is dead or negative space. We have the shadows coming in from the molding on the wall. We have our banister on the bottom that's showing, and this seems to be just a portrait or a headshot, maybe for her resume, or maybe she's an actress and she needs to put something out there for herself. When we then just crop in on the image and just focus in on her, it's a much cleaner image, and it really just shows her off instead of everything that's going around her, which doesn't need to be in the image. So filling the frame when appropriate. Don't worry about all the surroundings and the backgrounds. If it doesn't help or benefit the photo, crop it out. Eyes in the top third of the picture. So when we look at a picture, we can break it down into 3/3, or into 3 sections: a bottom, a middle, and a top section. When we look at his eyes, they are closer to the top of the image, or at least on that line that would cut across to then divide this into 3 different sections. If that's the case, we're keeping the human head in proportion, which puts the eyes at the higher point of the head and then drops everything else lower. So naturally, when we look at an image, typically humans are drawn to a multitude of different things, but bright colors, eyes, and other humans or anatomy of some sort. We're always attracted or naturally looking for that. We like to find similarities in things that remind us of ourselves. That's why a lot of paintings in a certain period of time, not a lot of abstract work, it was more going to be on the human side, because that's what we're familiar with and that's what we look for. We look for familiarity. Even in the portrait picture in the last one, her eyes are on the top third of the image. So again, keeping that, you have a little bit more of an even photo when you're shooting. The last thing is just to focus in on the eyes. There's that cheesy saying of the eyes being the gateway to the soul. Eyes have a very expressive color, even if you have very dark brown eyes. There's some form of color or movement in there which can be really exciting to look at. When we keep the eyes on the top third of the picture, obviously we can see that hers are, but when we focus in on the eyes, a lot of cameras nowadays have an eye focus detection because of how bad red eye used to be when you would shoot on old film or disposable. Most cameras now have the ability to put a little square or circle on the person's eye to focus in on that specifically, because that's one of the first things that we're attracted to. Now, I like to use this one too for getting on their level. The reason I say this is because a lot of people get buy cameras to take pictures of their kids, grandkids, or just maybe baseball team, whatever they're doing when it comes to children. And children being much smaller than we are can be a little bit tricky to take pictures of. This is a very candid photo. You can see the kind of the fun, the silliness on there. But if the person shooting this would have just dropped a little bit lower, they might have gotten something that had a little bit more professionalism to it, had a little bit more detail to it. Obviously, this is probably a nicer camera, but in the same boat, if this person would have just went up and took a picture of the top of their heads, not only would the kids be below us, so we're kind of creating this hierarchy scale where the children are lower, we're looking down at them. It really wouldn't show the same way this is showing, where you have the brother, you have sister off to the side, or at least a friend off to the side, you have the cake in the middle there, he's got the birthday hat on, so I imagine birthday boy. It just looks more professional, has a little bit more of a, less candid, but more, I'd say just more professional in general.
Is she blurred because of the setting?
Setting on there, yeah, that's going to be the aperture priority on there. So with aperture on the camera, that's our relationship to foreground and background.
Okay.
If we're looking at this, the cake and the boy seem to be in the foreground, so they're in the same plane in the front. The girl would be somewhere behind. So when the camera's focusing in, it's able to lock points between these two because they're in the foreground and the girl is further in the back. Even this birthday present that's in there is slightly in focus, but because it's behind, we can see that it's starting to lose that focus.
But if you don't wanna change settings, well, you know, like I'm saying my daughter's wedding or something, I just want like one setting and, you know, you can get that blurred background in editing or no?
You
That
can,
really?
it's tricky. It's a lot trickier to do.
Okay.
In that case, automatic is going to be your best friend on that. And automatic will, depending on what camera you have, it can read the situation and then readjust the aperture. However, though, again, when we're shooting and when we're learning the camera, I would say using aperture priority is one of the best ones to use because you get to really control that foreground to background relationship, which I think is very important when shooting. Because you can just allow the camera to pick up everything, and that's fine, but there might be parts where you're looking at it and you're like, this is terrible. If you can control that aperture a little bit, that's where you can get things like this, where you're blurring out the background slightly, still showing that someone's there, but your main priority then comes into focus with whatever it is you're trying to shoot. So we talk about that more in intermediate, so you might get a kick out of that one, because I think that's a setting that if you can learn to get past the automatic and more into that aperture or shutter priority, that's where you don't really have a lot of settings to play with. It's just one thing that you're able to change. Once you can understand how that changes, it really opens up a lot with your photography. In that too, instead of just getting on their level, get lower than them. So if we can, when we're shooting, especially children or anybody who's shorter, if we can drop lower than them and shoot up, not only are we working on keeping the eyes or at least the head features in the top third of the photo, but we're also giving the kids more of an elevation or more power, which for someone so tiny or someone who I would say doesn't have as much authority or power compared to adults, it is kind of a, I'd say, pleasant surprise or a nice switch in what we're doing. So again, either getting on their level or getting lower than them to put them a little bit more above us is a nice way of getting a good photo. Now we talked about dividing a photo into 3 sections from bottom, middle, and top, but now we can also talk about the rule of thirds, which divides a picture into 9 squares. So not only do we have a top row, middle row, and bottom row, but now we also have a right, left, and, a right, center, and left side as well too. We have 4 intersecting points that then get circled. And what we're trying to do when we're looking at something like the rule of thirds is we want to make sure we can get something within those dots. When I'm shooting on my camera, I naturally keep up a rule of thirds on there. So in my settings, I'm able to put these lines on there. When I'm shooting even with my cell phone, my lines are always on there. It's a little tough to see from you, but I always keep the lines on. To me, it doesn't disturb anything. It's just there to help guide me as I'm taking my photo. It's kind of like a little cheat code. So a good example of a rule of thirds, this case we have this surfer gentleman here. The surfer gentleman is standing perfectly on one of our intersecting lines. The shadow then that's being created from the sun is naturally dropping it down lower, and so we're hitting both those points. Another thing to keep in mind too is we have a horizon line in the background. A horizon line naturally occurs when our background and our foreground meet. The best way to look at this is that if it's above the horizon line, we should be looking up at whatever it is. If it's below the horizon line, we should see the top of whatever it is. So for example, when we have the horizon line right here, we can see the top of the water. If the water was higher, we wouldn't be able to see the top on there, and it would basically just be a cascading backwards kind of line. But regardless, we have it nice and even with the top line of our rule of thirds, a slight dip. That just could be the water, the waves. That also could just be the fact that we're around the planet. But our main point of focus is that we have this nice kind of drop down shadow, and we're covering 2 points of the rule of thirds. Now, in this case of maybe filling the frame, you could argue that maybe if you were to cut this photo off and maybe crop it in a little bit, it would just look a little bit cleaner. But at the same time, too, you're giving a nice context to a beautiful sunset with the water, the beach, the shine in the beach as well, too. And then on top of that, the dramaticism of that shadow dropping in. So again, you can crop this image. You don't have to crop the image, but rules are meant to be broken. Another beach photo, they're very popular with the rule of thirds, I don't know why. But horizon line is almost perfect with that white line. We've got nice separation between background and foreground. The little girl is on the rule of thirds perfectly, shoulder hitting one mark, ankle hitting the other. And we have this really nice black and white dramatic photo. The sun is kind of peeking through the clouds, so we're getting some break of light that's coming in there. And it just looks nice and dramatic. And even too, her head is in the top third of the photo, and it, in my opinion, would look as if the photographer bent down a little bit more to get this picture, giving a little bit more of that hierarchy scale for the little girl.
When my daughter is, though, she gets mad, like what I'm seeing, and she was telling me, like if you're taking her and her book, to make sure like you don't cut off the feet or the shoes or something like that. And I didn't realize that I was doing, because I was trying to focus in.
Yep.
But it was interesting when you said get on their level. Someone told me that like probably 20 some odd years ago.
It helps.
It was a great rule.
It's nice too because with humans, I mean, when I'm not at work, I make comic books. That's my other big thing. I'm an artist.
Awesome.
And when I'm drawing, one of the big rules that we always have is if you don't have to show legs, hands, or feet, don't show them, because they're the hardest thing to draw sometimes with the different configurations and size, proportion. But regardless, photography takes almost an opposite stance to that, where the more that you can put into the image, the better. Now, obviously, when you have an image like those headshots that we saw in the very beginning, something like this doesn't necessarily need to have everything else. Her shoulders don't need to be in there. Obviously, her hands, her legs aren't in there. But that's what we're trying to go for. When, especially a wedding photography, there you want to get the entirety of both the dress and the tux that the gentleman is wearing. It adds to kind of the whole thing. So everything's a little bit different on there. You always can pick and choose, but I think that getting the entirety of someone in the shot is really important. Moving on to the next image, we can see that the feet get cut off in this one, but at least in this one, we're kind of dipping down a little bit lower, or at least on the level of the kids, therefore giving the adults that full body. But both mom and dad and then brother and sister are perfectly in line. The only thing that drives me nuts on this one is I wish that mom and dad could have stepped over just one extra foot. They would have been perfectly in line, just like the kids are perfectly in line. We can't see the background, the horizon line on this one, but we do have converging lines where we have these brick buildings next to them that are all moving into a point. And if we were to draw just a little dot right here, I guarantee you that all of these lines would converge in. And we call that one-point perspective or a vanishing point perspective, where all of our lines that are going around our image are all coming into a point. Therefore, we get a really nice symmetry of the walls. Now, that can happen naturally, That can happen in art. You see a lot of different artists that use that type of strategy. But when we're taking photos, it can really just happen naturally because of the way that we build buildings and the way that we do things. And the last one I like to show is Jim. If anyone who's watched The Office, you probably recognize this. This breaks one of the rules, and that's the fill the space rule. And I like it because this gives context to where he's at, the conference room. You've got the blinds, the tree that's always in there. So again, it fits the purpose for why they're doing this. Now, when we look at it, his eyes might not be at the top third, but those eyebrows are. And that's enough there that keeps his head in the top part, which again adds that symmetry on there. You can see it cuts perfectly at the shoulders, gets it almost at the eyes, just above them a little bit, and it's symmetrically really nice. He's also almost perfectly on that line. We can then see enough of the background to put together where they're at right now in the show, which I think also adds to why they did it the way they did. Another thing I like to talk about is sun. The sun is your best friend when it comes to taking photos, but a lot of people are either scared of it or they're looking for flashes or other artificial light, and sun naturally is going to be your best source of light. When we take an image, the only reason we can get a photo is because there's light, and that light is then coming into the camera, giving us our image. So the top image, we say bad, and the bottom image, we say better. The reason we say the top one is bad is because we have the fish right in front of us. There's no sunlight coming in. We're dark on almost all different parts. The hat is covering his head. We don't really have any saturation of color or himself. Once we move that fish out of the way, naturally the fish is slimy, it's reflective, so it's going to bounce light and reflect that light into other areas. By doing that, we now have more light on the bottom of the boat. The legs are lit up a little bit more, the shirt, but what's really different is the face. That hat got cocked to the side a little bit more, so now we're allowing more light to come through, and that natural shine is lighting up this guy's face really well. So just keeping the sun on your back is great, because if you can angle that sun to give you more light, it'll help a lot more in the long run to get a cleaner image. We can make an image darker. It's hard to make an image lighter. That's what I always tell people. The more we make the photo lighter, we wash out certain things. We get rid of color, saturation, hue. But if we can make the image darker, the exposure, we drop that down a little bit, it usually will still look nice.
So I'm sorry, the sun at your back is the photographer,
In this
not
case,
as the.
in this case, it's the model. So the model that we have, you can tell that the sun is coming basically from
That's
this
what I
direction.
thought. That's what I was. Because
So-
I know if it's at the, at your back, it's
Mhm.
in their eyes. Then.
Exactly.
So it's the subject's back.
I would say so. If you can keep that sunlight on the subject's back, or even on your own back, where then you're opening it up, if there is a way that that person or the thing that you're taking photos of isn't blinded, then you should be alright. But in my experience with this, at least with this image, having the sun on the actual subject's back, as long as you can open them up a little bit more to the sun without taking too much away from them, then they should be good. I think this was the last slide that I have before I open it up to questions. I made things run a little bit longer. Use your timer or camera app. All of these cameras come with an application you can download for your phone, and I strongly recommend them. When you talk about photo editing, the app lets you do it on there, and it's really nice because you can transfer things to your phone, edit them. If you want to set a timer up on your phone, you can do that and remote control the camera itself, which is a really nice feature. The only things that I would say are downsides to doing this is, one, sometimes when you're doing this, it can drain the battery life of the camera severely. So if you're only bringing one battery on your vacation and you start using this app, you might notice that your battery goes down real quick. So definitely have multiple batteries with this. But two, I'd say the only other downside of using this is that when you transfer the photos over to your phone, they're going to get saved as a more diminished quality of the photo. So if you have maybe 10 photos, you've got your sister, your brother saying, hey, I'd love to see what you're doing on vacation, send them to your phone, text them out to people. That's totally fine. If you plan on doing, the entirety, like 50, 60 photos onto your phone, Number one, it's going to take a little bit of time, but then number two, it's going to waste the battery of both the phone and the camera pretty quickly. So pick and choose your battles with that one. This is more for content creation. Again, now we're moving into these, I would say, younger generations and even middle generations who are trying to make their own businesses or start their own kind of content that they're making online. When I was getting ready to teach this class, I was told that I can have two things. I can have one thing bad, but the other two have to be perfect. So you have your lighting, you have your audio quality, and you have your video quality. One can be bad, no more than that. If anything is more than that, then nobody cares about what you're doing because they just can't get over the fact that you either have bad audio, bad lighting, or bad video. So video quality, and again, everyone has different budgets when it comes into this. Cameras can cost as little as $200. They can go all the way up to $6,000, $7,000. So it's finding what works for you when you're getting a camera. Get the camera that suits your business the best or suits whatever content you're trying to make the best. Get the proper lenses for that. If you're using a big telephoto lens to just shoot content, a vlog of yourself talking about, cards or about, the food that you're making for your business, it's probably not going to look that good. But if you're using more of a portrait lens for that, you're probably capturing yourself better for what you're trying to do. Same thing with your camera. Make sure that you're using the proper camera body for what you want to get, and make sure your settings are good. Changing settings on a camera can feel a little scary, but there is always the chance that if you do screw up something, you can always reset the whole thing and just erase all the old settings and restart from the beginning. But for the most part, if you change a setting, you can always go back later. Stabilization is important too. If you're noticing that you have shaky videos or things don't look right, a lot of the times it's not the camera, it's you. And in that case, getting something like a tripod or a monopod or getting gimbals, those are great. Video, definitely gimbals are the way to go, but for still photography, a tripod is perfect. Even for video, I would say tripods are great. If you're doing more action or running and gunning, that's when then a gimbal is probably going to be more appropriate for that. Lighting, there's multitudes of different lighting that you can do. I always talk about this room because as nice as this room looks, I think the lighting in here is just terrible. It's canned recessed lighting that's in the ceiling, reflecting down. It just doesn't have enough glow, but it makes the mood in here very nice. So having the appropriate lighting is important. There's on-camera lighting, little squares that you can get and attach on there, little LED bricks. Those are great. That also includes flashes too. Studio lighting. In the next class it might be the advanced camera class, but in one of the classes we talk about the 3-point key light method, where you have lights on the front, one for the background, and then a fill light to make sure that you're lighting up your subject matter as best as possible. Natural lighting, just like we talked about in the last couple slides ago, natural lighting, the sun is your best friend. So using that appropriately to get the shots that you're trying to get will go a long way. Microphones are big, shotgun mics, on-camera mics, wireless mics, they're all different types. Your camera has a microphone on the inside of it, but that microphone is pretty weak. It's not the best. So if you really are concerned about the sound quality, I definitely would invest in just a cheap shotgun microphone that you can put on the top. It'll go a long way.
Mike is awful good on this one.
Yeah. For some people it works perfectly, and again, for what you were trying to accomplish, it probably did exactly the job.
Well, I didn't even know I had it.
That's all you had.
I see the video with the mic, I didn't even know I had it. The sea lions make good noise.
There you go. And then for anybody who just wants to get into it but doesn't want to buy all this extra equipment, most camera companies make a little box that you can buy that gives you a microphone, a tripod, and a little remote of some sort. Most cameras do. If not, you can always piece it together piece by piece. But if you are trying to get into more of that content creation realm, they make stuff out there so that you can get it done without having to research a bunch or spend a lot of money or what have you. And then I think this might be the last slide I got. So recommended accessories. I think that anybody who's starting photography should at least have the top 5 different pieces there. Get a bag for protection. You should never carry the camera by itself. I didn't even listen to my rule. Do as I say, not as I do. When I went to London, I just kept the camera on my neck at all times. Even through the airport, everything, I traveled with it on my neck. And I was definitely sore after doing that for 10 days. But have a bag disassemble the camera, put it into nice padded spots, but it keeps the camera safe. Having an extra battery, I think, is a must, and an extra memory card. If there's anything that you're thinking about buying, those are the two. All it takes is for you to forget to charge your camera. You go out, you're ready to shoot, and then you find out the battery's dead. What do? If you have an extra battery that's ready to go, you should be okay. Extra memory card. Like I talked about in the beginning of the class, when those memory cards, they have the copper pads on there. When those get worn out after a period of time, they no longer read by the camera. The exploding part of the memory card, again, depends on temperature and maybe pressure differential that you see there. But for the most part, the biggest common misfire on a memory card is that copper on those strips have gotten worn out and they no longer make contact with the camera the way they're supposed to. So have an extra memory card anywhere that you go. You'll always get a strap when you get a camera. If you buy a brand new one, in the box there should be a strap. The thing that you probably don't get and that you should have is a lens cleaning kit. Do not use your sweater or your t-shirt or a blanket. It's the same thing like with your regular glasses. I know we all have the tendency of just kind of wiping them away on our shirt, but if we can have that little microfiber cloth, a little spray, it goes a long way. I do the Chicago Polar Bear Plunge every year. I volunteer and I take photos for it. One of the things that I have to do in there is I get in the water and I have a ghillie suit on all the way up to here. It's -7 degrees outside in January. But what's nice is that when people are jumping in and doing stuff, I'm able to take pictures. As they're jumping, I get a little bit of splash from that water that'll come up and hit my lens. Given how cold it is, it freezes almost immediately. So my little towel that I carry with me, I just wipe it all away and I'm good to keep going. If I don't have that, that's when my images are going to look blurry or crummy. So I think that these are the 5 most important things that if you're buying a camera, you should absolutely be getting these extra 5. From there, if a tripod suits you, if you need it, definitely get one. You can get monopods. You can even get a little more crazy and buy the expensive carbon fiber tripods, which will weigh a lot less than an aluminum one. So if you have problems with weight, that's a good one to go with. An external hard drive. Again, save your images, put them on and back them up. If you're not using one of the free cloud-based solutions, an external hard drive goes a long way. Filters, you've got ND filters, you've got polarized filters, UV filters, you've even got effects filters out there too. Invest in them if that's something that you need. If you're noticing bad glares when you're taking photos, most likely it's coming from the sun. Using a filter should reduce that. Additional lenses are always great too. We'll talk about that more in my intermediate class next week. And then take more classes and workshops. If you're going on vacation or you're just leaving even to go, I don't know, to Wisconsin for work, bring your camera with you. Even if you have an extra 20 minutes to do nothing with, take photos, practice with it. If you are leaving and going somewhere and you don't bring your camera, I think that's shame on you, because you should always bring it with you and travel with it. It helps you learn. Classes are great too. Workshops and groups are good too. My favorite is I have a couple people that come in. They're part of the Chicago Botanical Garden Club, and what they do is they'll compete with each other. They'll all take photos, they'll edit them, then they'll basically have like a group showing of them. Whoever's is the best or voted on, they'll make that the cover for that week's monthly magazine or whatever they put out for whatever publication. But it's really amazing the work that they're able to do and that kind of camaraderie that they're able to
Do you
create.
ever sleep?
Yeah.
We just listed 100 different.
I know. There's so many things. And then I think this is it. My last, the bitterness of poor quality remains long after the sweetness of the low price is forgotten. It's great to get a deal, especially when we're looking at our camera equipment. It can get really expensive. But photography is one of those art forms that the more money you can invest in your product, the better off you're going to be in the long run with it. So get a deal when you can get a deal. But if that lens that you need is X amount of dollars and it just doesn't seem like it's worth it, I promise you in the long run of your photos and your journey through it, they're worth it. That's all I got for you guys. So
It's amazing, thank you.
anytime. That's my email, my phone number, so feel free to take a picture of that guy. Call me anytime, email me
That's why
anytime.
you got it there, it's on the phone. Instead of calling the store yesterday, I was looking all over, and then I just now realized, I took a picture, and it's on the phone.
And two, my business cards are downstairs, so if you just stop by the small electronics, you can just ask for Saxon's card, and they'll give it to you too. But I tell people all the time, if you take a photo and you're like, I don't understand why it looks this way, or you're really proud of a photo. I love seeing that stuff. I have a couple different students who've been in class, and they'll send me their vacation photos, and I get a kick out of it. It's really fun seeing what you guys do with your cameras and how you're using them. So always email me photos. If you got questions, email me. If I can't answer it, I can find you a video on YouTube that'll answer it, lickety split. So again,
I
say-
appreciate that, yeah,
course.
cause I, you know, like I said, being the mother of the bride, I'm not gonna be able to, but I'm the, you know, like, I always tease and say I'm the drunken photographer, so they have a real photographer,
Yeah.
and I'll take 600 pictures,
Yeah.
and like you said, I don't delete, but then they have the, not the posed ones, they have the, you know, fun on the dance
Candid,
floor,
right,
and all the other
exactly, the
stuff that
fun
people
ones.
aren't getting. But, so I'm gonna go through withdrawal at this wedding, but I'm just trying to figure out what the best setting for that day is for
Yeah.
me, for like.
How much time do you have till?
Pardon me?
How much time do you have till the wedding?
December 9th.
Oh, okay. So you got time. You got time.
Ish.
Yeah. It really,
It's, cause there's so much more that has to be done, so that's why I'm hoping to come next week. But I think that if there's a fitting or something like that, I don't think that, so.
not an issue. No matter what, too, I live stream these at the same time. So that's what's going on right here with this computer. So my camera is running, and I'm basically talking to people online, including you guys too. So if you go to YouTube, Apt Electronics, you'll see every Thursday at 5:30 it pops up. The second thing though is every time I make one of these videos, they automatically save onto our playlist. So you can even just go back through and watch some of the old classes. And then I would say pop in. My only days off are Tuesday, Wednesday. That's not on here. But if you pop in any of those other days and just say, hey, I watched a couple of your videos. Can you explain X, Y, Z to me? I should be able to show you real quick. Bring the camera in, and then we can practice by the fountain.
Yeah, cause the other one, this is just got the mirrorless, so like anything, you get a new cell phone and you don't know all the, you're
100%.
more comfortable with everything
Yeah.
else, you know, so.
I would recommend.
Which one is that?
The bear.
Oh, the bear.
Oh. Well, we didn't frame it properly.
No, but it looks great. You have a duck going in the back. The quality looks
Oh, you're
fantastic.
showing the video?
Yeah.
So they were just on a cruise in Alaska,
That's amazing.
and I remember talking about this prior to them leaving.
Yeah, but here's what happens because we weren't steady.
It happens. That happens. It still looks great though. The seals on the little buoy out there. Oh.
That's the noisy one, so.
What I found,
Here,
this is his project, the camera,
Yeah.
but I tried using it.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't really comfortable. I don't know if it was my stability, because I'm used to the point and shoot,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know, I felt like it was taking a long time to take the picture.
It could have been. It could have been the focusing on there, and it could be the way that you have it set up. With automatic, I won't lie, because it's the most basic one on there. Sometimes it has a harder time focusing in because it's trying to do its best to understand your situation and then
Okay.
focus. If you can start to learn, and I know next week we talk about that aperture priority, I think that might help a lot, because then the focusing is quicker, but now you've determined whether or not we have the background in focus or if we're just focusing on one thing. And that might also help for yours too. I think the aperture priority helps a lot when it comes to that. As far as the video goes, the shakiness comes, and really,
see, this one I got steady with.
Excuse me, is there a bathroom on this floor?
yes, it's gonna be, if you wrap around, it's gonna be basically in the middle section there on
Is
the
it
back wall.
Is that the video
Do you
or
mind
is
if I
that?
just leave
That's
my
the video.
phone?
Right here.
Oh,
Thank you.
That's the video. I was pretty good with that.
That looks fantastic. The lighting on that looks awesome.
That's
Yeah.
a red squirrel, I think they call it, or something
Oh,
like
it's
that.
fantastic.
so to edit the videos, do you have to have special software? I can't do it from here.
No, you should be able to do it through, because this is running Windows, right?
It's running on Windows, so it's not software that I have to purchase.
No.
See, this is
No,
a
they
little
should
better.
have-
This is where it really, when it's full screen like this. See, they smash
Yeah.
the fish. They don't eat it right in their mouth. They
They
smash it
smash it to get it all
to
open.
eat the eggs.
Interesting.
At least that's what the girl told us right
I'm
we
sure.
were there.
No, I'm sure.
You know. So like I said,
Trying
you
to
know,
get
this
rid
is
of
where
it.
I either got jostled or I moved around, or it was just, you know.
So like to edit from there, even to get the bear when I wanted to reproduce it,
Mm-hmm.
I snipped it.
Okay. Yeah.
Is that
That's
rather
fine.
than take a frame.
Yeah, no, that works too. I mean, however you can do it so that you get what you need on there. Basically, snipping would be then taking a frame out of it. What I would say is if you just go on YouTube and type in, I can't remember what the name is. I know it's not QuickTime Player, but there is a name for their editor that they have on there because Apple has their own free one.
I think they have it on here, I'll have to look at it. I'm reluctant sometimes to click on things that I'm
Yeah.
not familiar with. Okay.
The Apple uses iMovie, and I know that's their free one, and so I know Windows has one too. But that's the nice thing that they have free editors, so you can change things on there, which is really great.
This didn't, I don't like that one. Oh,
This
Oh, well.
one.
Oh, that looks fantastic.
yeah, but it's not centered, I learned now. Cause sometimes you just wanna snap, you wanna
Yeah.
get as many as you can. And for us, it was really just, the memory.
Keeping that little bit of that rule of thirds up there helps a
Yeah.
lot. I like putting those brackets on there, and if you just go to the settings, you can find those.
We
and
can
put
do
them
that
on,
on the
and
camera.
you can do it on the camera, and I
Okay.
recommend it. I definitely do.
Okay.
I'm going to close out. And anybody online have any other questions, feel free to email or call me. But it doesn't look like you guys do. So have a great night, everybody.